Hey there, gang. Welcome back to another episode of Learning to Paint on YouTube, where I am teaching myself how to paint using only YouTube tutorials. Now, last episode, you may have seen my debacle trying to paint for the first time without a tutorial. This week, I went back to YouTube, and I'm painting this week with Kevin Hill, Paint with Kevin. So if you're interested in this painting, you definitely need to jump over to his channel and check out his tutorial. It's a weeping willow tree with light shining through it, and it just captured me immediately when I saw him paint it. He actually did it with oils, and I did it with acrylic. So if you're interested, definitely check out the description below for the link to his tutorial. Enjoy this episode.
So I'm starting this painting putting in just a little yellow and white. This will be a weeping willow tree with light shining around it. So I'm laying in that thin layer of yellow and white. You can barely tell the colors there, but I'm laying that in as kind of a base coat or covering for this painting. And next I'll come in with kind of a grayish blue color and apply this to the right hand side of the canvas just to begin to create some definition for the shadows that will be created around the tree. So I'm coming in with a blue-gray on the right side, starting to also lay in some of this low horizon line. This will actually be kind of the ground where the tree will sit. And so I'm just creating the rough block in, covering the canvas with this gray-blue color. So now I'll come in on the left-hand side of the canvas with a light green color, again laying in the definition around the giant willow that will sit closer to the center of the canvas. Using that light green color to cover the canvas, as well as to begin to create the shape of where the tree will actually sit. Also, as you can tell on the left hand side, also defining kind of the ground or the horizon line. The light will be coming from in front of the tree. The tutorial is actually set where the light would come in from the left hand side, but the way I end up painting this, you'll see in the end that the light appears to come from in front of the tree, which was its own set of challenges, but wasn't totally unhappy with how it turned out. And now I noticed as I was painting this that I come in really heavy with that dark blue-gray, and it was just too dark for what I really wanted in the picture. So you can see here I've lightened that with some titanium white and toned down the contrast or the saturation of that. This has really been a lesson for me. This painting specifically was a lesson in blending colors, and something that I'm still not good at, but I'm getting better, which is really surprising to me how quickly that skill is beginning to improve, and how I'm getting to start to kind of feel my way around the color wheel in that regard, to be able to saturate or desaturate colors on my palette to produce a better effect. And now we're coming in with a very light green to lay in the basic shape of the willow tree, starting of course on the left, framing that light opening with the branches of the willow that will extend clear across the canvas. So just laying in the location of these branches, working with the light green that will give the appearance of light coming through the branches when it's done, but really just laying in the shape and the overall position of the branches across the top of the canvas now. The next step is to begin to lay in some definition for the ground, the green on the ground. So you'll notice that because it is closer to the viewer, the saturation on the green is much more strong. And so laying in just the groundwork, literally the groundwork for this, with a bright, nice, sharp, saturated green. Once that's completed and smoothed out, coming in with an even more saturated green, adding some dark burnt umber and a little blue, creating the shadow that will be cast from the canopy of the tree across the bottom of the canvas. So just beginning to lay that in right now for the basic location of these shadows that will sit under this tree. You'll notice now that the ground I realized was a little too much blue-green, and so I've brought in yellow, which gives it a more realistic grass look from my perspective. So really have coated that entire area in this more realistic grass-looking green. And now we come in with an angle brush to lay in the rough position of the tree. And this will be the main trunk of the tree. In the original tutorial video, the trunk is laid more to the right on the canvas, more maybe 2/3 of the way across the canvas. And I think if you're attempting this, that's the proper placement composition wise. It helps lead the eye a little bit. As you'll see as I continue my painting, the tree is a little too much front and center. It's the trunk is a little too centered, and so it makes it, from my perspective, look a little less realistic and a little more amateurish. But this was the very first attempt, so again, I'm not completely unsatisfied with how it turns out in the end. With the primary tree shape now in place, it's time to come and start putting in a little bit using, as you can see, the fan brush, laying in the specific branches that hang down from the willow. The fan brush allows you to lay in quite a few branches at once without having to paint every single leaf. So again, we're laying this in with a little more saturated than the original underlayer, but once this is on top, then it will look like the light is shining through the tree branches with that light shade of green. And it also gives me a model for how I want my tree to be shaped. So I'm going to go in here and lay all of these branches in across the top of the canvas. With the main tree shape laid in now, I'm coming in with a lighter kind of yellowish green to lay in highlights, especially on this right-hand side over the darker branches that I've laid in. This actually allowed me, as I got into the painting, to correct some of the things that just weren't working for me and create the perception of light shining through some of these darker branches that I felt were just a little heavy, especially towards the bottom or towards the ground, as willow branches typically get a little more or a little less dense as they hang further down, so there would be more light shining through. This layer allowed me to add those highlights and to create that perception of light shining through this tree. When I realized that this technique was really effective on the right hand side, I decided to use this also on the left hand side where I just felt I had laid it in pretty heavy at the top. And so you'll notice in between these two larger branches, I'm really dabbing in that light color to open the tree up a little bit more, to create more of an arced crown to the tree. I'm also bringing some of these lighter branches over the tops of the main branches of the tree to give it an appearance that is, I believe, a little more realistic, because a lot of the branches would hang down over the large branches, and so that helped me kind of create a little bit of a more realistic view for how the tree was structured. Having got the shape of the tree how I want it, I stepped back from the canvas and now am using the similar tones in the crown of the tree with the fan brush to provide some lighter highlights here on the grass that will give the perception that there's light shining through the upper branches of the tree onto the grass below. Also created some definition for the roots of the tree expanding into the ground there. Now coming in at the edges with a little bit more saturated green tones to bring in the shadows that will cut that light down. With the really bright highlights added to the side and front of the tree, it's time to add the shade or the shadow for the main trunk of the tree that extends out towards the viewer. So I brought in the same tone that was in the trunk, just a little bit darker, and applied that across the lower part of the canvas in order to create the shadow that the tree casts as the light shines there, kind of from the front and left hand side. Now I made a mistake here. On the far left side, you can see there, I was actually going to put in some bushes there, but they ended up with just like a dark blob. And so what I decided to do in order to kind of salvage that, I actually, as I was painting, wasn't sure what it was going to do. I was thinking maybe a bush or some rocks, and so I came in with some highlight colors and added kind of a facade, and it ends up actually looking like there's maybe a rock wall or some boulders that are covered with the kind of green light shining on them, and actually turned out okay for covering up the mistake I had made. So I was pretty pleased because in the original tutorial, it was actually, he put bushes or some flowers there, but I just did not create them, or didn't have the skill to create them. They didn't come out the way I wanted. So this was a great solution, and it turned out really good. Now it's time to come in with some highlights on the tree trunk itself. So I begin to lay in kind of a light, I use some burnt umber, a little white to provide or to place the highlights of the light shining around the tree. This was to give the tree a little more life and more realism, and to honestly hide some of the mistakes I had made in laying out the branches of the tree. So you can see I'm taking it pretty slow. This is with a pretty fine round brush to lay in those highlights. Had to be really careful here because obviously a lot of light wouldn't get into the tree, and I got a little carried away here laying those highlights in and realized that I had put them in places that they wouldn't naturally appear. And I started, you can see here on the trunk, laying them in as creating texture on the tree. And it didn't work. It worked in the highlights, but it got a little too heavy. So I got a little crazy there. After a return to the palette, however, remixed, brought in a little blue and some darker color, I was able to create the same texture I was wanting, covering up some of these highlights on the back, but still creating a darker brown that allowed me to create the effect of realism that I was going for. So just laying that in here, actually removing some of the highlights that I went a little bananas with earlier. Here we're coming to the end of this project, and you can see how it turned out. I'm really pleased with the lighting, the shading, and the color mixing I did. Learned a lot from this project.
So that's it, y'all. What did you think? I learned so much with this episode. It really was digging into all of these colors, all these shades of green, and really learning how to blend for maximum efficacy. I'm really pleased with how the shading under the tree turned out and how it really appears that the light is shining from in front of the tree. That was something that I hadn't yet really been able to nail down. And so, even though some of the things I wasn't really pleased with, as far as the placement of the tree and even the shape of the trunk, I was really pleased with how the highlights turned out. And so, I'm excited to continue to develop my skills in this regard, both mixing paint and mixing colors, as well as playing with lights and shadows, because it really does make a difference as I'm learning in the quality of the painting you're able to produce. Again, like I said, if you're interested in trying out this painting, I really encourage you to jump over to Kevin's channel. It's in the description. If you liked my painting and you like watching me kind of fumble my way through this experience, definitely subscribe and click the bell icon and like this video so you'll see more of my videos here on YouTube. I'll see you next time on another episode of Learning to Paint on YouTube.